I wasn't meant to see it. Andrew had left his phone face up on the kitchen counter while he stepped outside to take a call. I wasn't snooping, I was wiping up spilled coffee. But then the screen lit up. Lauren's name. And beneath it, one sentence that stopped my heart. She will be dead soon anyway. My hand froze mid-motion. The cloth slipped from my fingers. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. They were talking about me, my own son, and the woman he chose. And somehow, deep down, I knew this wasn't a joke. This was a plan. If this moment made your chest tighten even a little, I'd love for you to stay with me. Tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Have you ever trusted someone who quietly broke your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Before that message, before that single sentence cracked something inside me, I would have told you without hesitation that I had lived a good life. Not an easy one, but a good one. I raised my son, Andrew Hayes, mostly on my own. His father, Thomas, passed away when Andrew was just 9 years old. A sudden heart attack on a quiet Sunday morning. One minute, we were arguing about whether we needed a new roof, and the next, I was sitting in a hospital hallway staring at a vending machine, wondering how the world could keep moving when mine had just stopped. From that day forward, everything I did was for Andrew. I was a school principal for nearly 30 years in a small district outside Hartford, Connecticut. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, respectable. It paid the bills. And more importantly, it gave me structure, something to hold on to when grief threatened to swallow me whole. I woke up at 5:30 every morning, packed Andrew's lunch, checked his homework, drove him to school before heading to mine. I attended every parent-teacher conference, even when I was the one running them. I never missed a school play, a soccer game, or a single birthday. Even on the days when I felt like I was falling apart, there were nights I cried quietly in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear me. Nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing enough, being enough. But every morning, I put myself back together because that's what mothers do. We don't get to fall apart, not when someone else depends on us to stay whole. Andrew was a sweet boy, gentle, thoughtful. He used to leave little notes on my nightstand, crayon scribbles at first, then handwritten messages as he got older. I love you, Mom. You're the best. Don't be sad. I kept every single one. When he was 16, he got his first job at a grocery store down the street. He insisted on buying his own school supplies that year. I remember standing in the kitchen watching him unload a plastic bag with notebooks and pens, feeling this overwhelming pride that made my chest ache. I thought I truly believed I had raised a good man. When he left for college, I stood in his empty bedroom and cried harder than I had in years. Not because I was losing him, but because I knew I had done my job. I had given him everything I could, and for a while it seemed like it had been enough. He called me every Sunday, without fail. We talked about everything: his classes, his friends, the girl he liked, but was too nervous to ask out. I listened. I laughed. I gave advice when he asked for it, and kept quiet when he didn't. When he graduated, I was in the front row, clutching my purse so tightly my fingers went numb. When they called his name, I stood up before I even realized I was moving. "That's my son," I whispered to the woman next to me as if she needed to know. After college, things got harder for him. The job market wasn't kind, and Andrew struggled to find his footing. He bounced between a few positions before landing in real estate. It wasn't stable. At first, commissions are unpredictable, but I supported him however I could. Financially, when necessary. Emotionally, always. When he wanted to move into a better apartment to be closer to opportunity, I co-signed the lease. When he had a slow quarter and couldn't cover expenses, I helped. Quietly, without making him feel small. "I'll pay you back, Mom," he would say. And I would smile and tell him, "Just focus on building your life," because that's what I wanted. Not repayment, not recognition, just to see him stand on his own 2 feet, strong and steady. Then he met Lauren. She was impressive, I'll give her that. Polished, confident. The kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately knew where she stood and expected everyone else to know it too. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm, always dressed impeccably, always saying the right things. The first time we met, she brought a bottle of wine and complimented my home within seconds of stepping inside. "It's beautiful, Scarlett," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "So warm. You must have incredible taste." I remember smiling a little, flattered, a little cautious. Andrew looked happy. That's what mattered to me. And for a while, I convinced myself that was enough. They got married 2 years later. A small ceremony, tasteful and elegant, very Lauren. I paid for most of it, though she insisted on handling the details. Flowers, venue, guest list. Everything had to be just right. It's not about extravagance, she told me once. It's about presentation. I didn't argue. After the wedding, they moved into a townhouse about 20 minutes from me. Not too far, not too close. We saw each other on holidays, occasional dinners, birthdays. The rhythm of our relationship changed, but that's natural, isn't it? Children grow up. They build their own lives. You step back, you give them space, and you trust that the love you built doesn't disappear. It just evolves. There were moments, small ones, that didn't sit quite right. Lauren would sometimes steer conversations in subtle ways. So Scarlett, she said once over dinner, swirling her wine, "Have you ever thought about downsizing? That house must be a lot to manage on your own." I laughed it off. "I've been managing it just fine for years." "Of course," she replied, quickly smiling. "I just mean, planning ahead is always wise. Planning ahead." At the time, it sounded reasonable, responsible even. Another time, Andrew asked casually, "Hey, Mom, do you have everything organized? You know, like your will and all that." I remember pausing just for a second. "It's handled," I said. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, just thinking about the future, making sure everything's clear. Clear. That word lingered with me longer than it should have, but I pushed it aside, because what kind of mother assumes the worst about her own child? What kind of woman looks at her son? The boy who used to leave her notes that said, "Don't be sad," and wonders if there's something darker behind his questions. So I ignored it. I ignored the way Lauren's eyes would flick around the house, as if she were quietly taking inventory. I ignored the slight shift in Andrew's tone when money came up. I ignored the growing feeling deep in my chest that something was changing in ways I didn't fully understand, because it was easier to believe in the version of my life that made sense, the version where my son loved me, the version where my family was safe, the version where I had done everything right, and it had been enough. But that message on his phone? "She will be dead soon anyway." It didn't come out of nowhere. It came from somewhere. And as I stood there in my kitchen, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air, I realized something that made my stomach turn. Maybe the signs had been there all along, and I had simply chosen not to see them. Once that sentence lodged itself in my mind, it refused to leave. It echoed in the quiet moments, in the spaces between conversations, in the stillness of my home late at night when the house creaked softly. There was nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. She will be dead soon anyway. The words didn't just hurt, they rearranged everything I thought I knew. Because once you hear something like that, you don't just question the moment, you question everything that came before it. I started noticing things I had overlooked for months, maybe longer. Little details, small shifts, conversations that had seemed harmless at the time but now felt deliberate, calculated. I remembered a Sunday afternoon about 3 months earlier. Andrew and Lauren had come over for lunch. I had made roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of meal that used to make Andrew smile when he was younger. He barely touched it that day. Instead, he kept glancing at his phone, distracted. Lauren, on the other hand, was unusually attentive, not to me, but to the house. "This place really is something, Scarlett," she said, standing near the doorway to the living room. Her eyes scanned the walls, the furniture, the artwork Thomas and I had collected over decades. "You've maintained it beautifully." "Thank you," I replied, setting down a plate. She walked slowly toward the staircase, running her fingers lightly along the banister. "How many bedrooms did you say it has again? 4. And it's just you here now." She asked, her tone light, almost casual. I nodded. "It has been for a long time." She smiled, but there was something behind it, something I couldn't quite name at the time. "That's a lot of space for one person." I laughed softly. "I suppose it is, but I've grown into it." Andrew finally looked up then. "Yeah, but Mom, have you ever thought about something smaller?" he asked. I remember blinking, surprised. "Smaller, just easier to manage," he said quickly. "Less upkeep, less stress." "I'm not stressed," I replied, still smiling though something in my chest tightened slightly. Lauren chimed in gently. "It's just about planning ahead, thinking long term. Planning ahead." There it was again. At the time, I told myself they were being thoughtful, responsible, concerned. Now replaying the moment in my mind, I saw it differently. They weren't asking. They were assessing, evaluating. Another memory surfaced, one that made my stomach twist. It was a phone call with Andrew late in the evening. I had just finished reading and was about to go to bed when my phone rang. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice unusually serious. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Yeah, everything's fine. I just wanted to ask you something." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "What is it?" There was a pause. "Do you have your will updated?" The question felt abrupt, but I tried not to show it. "Yes," I said, "it's been taken care of." "Recently," he pressed. I hesitated. "A couple of years ago." Another pause. "You might want to revisit it," he said, "just to make sure everything's clear." Clear. That word again. "I don't see the urgency," I replied carefully. "It's not urgency," he said quickly. "It's just being responsible. Responsible." I remember feeling a flicker of irritation then, though I pushed it down. I've handled my affairs responsibly for decades. "Andrew," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Of course," he said, softening. "I didn't mean it like that. We changed the subject after that." But now thinking back, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. He wasn't asking out of concern. He was checking, measuring, seeing where things stood. There were other moments, too. Lauren offering to help organize my paperwork. Andrew insisting on driving me to appointments I had managed on my own for years. Small comments about my memory. "Didn't you already tell me that, Mom?" he said once, laughing lightly. I had frowned. "No, I don't think I did." "Oh," he replied quickly. "Maybe I'm mistaken." At the time, I brushed it off. Now I wondered, was he planting seeds, creating a narrative? The thought made my chest tighten. Because if that was true, if they were slowly building a case, shaping how others might see me, then this wasn't just about money. It was about control. And suddenly, that message didn't feel like an isolated cruelty. It felt like a piece of something larger, something that had been unfolding quietly right in front of me. I stood in my kitchen that afternoon, staring at the spot where his phone had been, my mind racing. Had I really been that blind, or had I simply chosen not to see what didn't fit the story I wanted to believe? Because the truth is, when you love someone deeply, when you've built your life around them, it becomes almost impossible to imagine them as the source of your pain. You rewrite things in your head. You soften the edges. You explain away the discomfort. Not because you're foolish, but because the alternative is too painful to accept. I walked slowly into the living room and sat down in my usual chair. The house felt different, not physically, but emotionally, like something invisible had shifted, like the walls themselves were holding secrets I had only just begun to hear. I looked around at the photographs on the mantel. Andrew at age 5, missing his front teeth and grinning at the camera. Andrew at 16, standing proudly in his first suit. Andrew on his wedding day, smiling beside Lauren. I had believed in those moments, believed they represented something real, something lasting. But now I couldn't help but wonder, when had things started to change? When had love turned into something transactional? When had I become an asset to be managed instead of a person to be cherished? The question lingered in the air, heavy and unanswered, and beneath it a deeper realization began to take shape slowly, painfully but undeniably clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a moment taken out of context. It was a pattern, one I had ignored for far too long, and if I continued to ignore it, I might not get another chance to protect myself. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting shadows that stretched and shifted across the room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message again. Not just the words, but the cold certainty behind them. She will be dead soon anyway. There was something final about it. Not hopeful, not speculative, certain. And certainty like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from expectation, or worse, intention. By morning, I had convinced myself of one thing I needed to know more. Not guess, not assume, not spiral into fear based on a single sentence. I needed proof. That afternoon, Andrew stopped by again. "Hey, Mom," he said as he walked in, setting his keys on the counter like he always did. Casual, familiar, comfortable. Too comfortable. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. He moved around the kitchen, easily opening the fridge without asking, grabbing a bottle of water. "You doing okay?" he asked, glancing at me briefly. "Yes," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" He shrugged. Just checking, just checking." There was something about the way he said it light, almost careless, that made my stomach tighten. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing important. Weather. A neighbor who had moved out. The usual surface-level exchanges that fill space without saying anything real. But underneath it, I was watching him. Every movement, every expression, trying to reconcile the man standing in front of me with the words I had seen on his phone. At one point, his phone buzzed on the counter. My eyes flicked to it instinctively. He didn't pick it up right away, and for a brief moment, just a second, the screen lit up. Lauren. I couldn't see the full message from where I stood, but I saw enough. Not much longer. My chest tightened. Andrew grabbed the phone quickly this time, almost too quickly. He glanced at the screen, then slipped it into his pocket. "Work stuff," he said, as if I had asked. I hadn't. But the explanation came anyway, unprompted, and that more than anything told me something was wrong. "Of course," I said softly. He stayed for another 10 minutes, then left. The moment the door closed behind him, the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than usual. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. Then slowly, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for another accidental glimpse. I was going to look, intentionally. That evening, I drove to their townhouse. I didn't call ahead. I told myself I was just dropping off something leftover soup, perhaps. A small, harmless excuse. But the truth was, I needed to see, needed to understand. Lauren opened the door. "Oh, Scarlett," she said, surprise flickering across her face, before it smoothed into a polite smile. "We weren't expecting you." "I was in the area," I replied, holding up the container in my hand. "I made too much." "How thoughtful," she said, stepping aside to let me in. Andrew was in the living room, his phone in his hand. He looked up when I entered. "Mom, everything okay?" "Of course," I said, smiling gently. "I just brought you some dinner." He relaxed slightly, though something in his posture remained tense. We exchanged small talk. Lauren set the soup in the kitchen. Andrew asked about my day. Normal. So painfully normal. At one point, Lauren excused herself to take a call upstairs. Andrew followed a few minutes later. "I need to check something," he said already halfway up the stairs. And just like that, I was alone. The house was quiet. Still. My eyes drifted to the coffee table. Andrew's phone wasn't there, but his tablet was. The screen was dark, but I knew enough about technology to understand one thing: devices sync. My heart began to pound, not from fear, but from something sharper. Resolve. I hesitated. Just for a moment. Because once you cross a line like that, once you choose to look, you can't unsee what you find. But then I remembered the message, and whatever hesitation I had disappeared. I picked up the tablet. The screen lit up instantly. No password. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated my fingers, moving slower than usual, as if they were resisting what my mind had already decided. Messages. There it was. A thread between Andrew and Lauren. I opened it, and everything inside me went still. The message I had seen earlier was there, clear, unmistakable. She will be dead soon anyway. But it wasn't alone. There were more. Dozens. Scrolling upward, my breath caught in my throat. "Lauren, we just need to be patient. Her health isn't great." "Andrew, I know, but how long are we talking?" "Lauren, months. Maybe less if things go the right way." My fingers froze on the screen. The right way. What did that mean? I kept reading. "Andrew, I don't want this to get complicated." "Lauren, it won't. We just have to stay consistent, keep encouraging the idea of assisted living." Assisted living. My chest tightened painfully. "Lauren. Once she's out of the house, everything becomes easier." "Andrew. What about the will, Lauren?" "That's why you need to keep bringing it up. She needs to update it while she still thinks clearly." My vision blurred for a moment. Still thinks clearly. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. "Andrew, I don't like talking about it like this." Lauren, then don't think about it emotionally. Think about it practically. This is your future. Your future. The words echoed in my mind like a verdict. There was a long pause in the conversation after that. Then further down, Lauren. She's alone. She won't fight it. My hand tightened around the edge of the tablet. Alone. Won't fight. The assumptions. The certainty. As if I were already fading. Already gone. I scrolled further. Andrew, are you sure this is the best way? For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, I felt something shift inside me. Doubt. Hope even. But it didn't last. Lauren. It's the easiest way. Easiest. That word landed heavier than all the others, because it wasn't about necessity. It wasn't about concern. It was about convenience. I sat there frozen, the tablet still in my hands, the room around me fading into the background. Everything I had feared was real, not exaggerated, not misunderstood, real. And worse than that, it was deliberate, planned, structured in quiet conversations I was never meant to see. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. My heart jumped. I quickly set the tablet back on the table, exactly where it had been. By the time Andrew walked back into the room, I was sitting calmly on the couch, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Sorry about that, he said. Work stuff. Of course, I replied, my voice steady. He smiled at me. The same smile I had trusted for 42 years, and for the first time in my life, I saw right through it, because now I knew the truth. This wasn't just about waiting for me to die. It was about making sure everything was in place before I did. I drove home in silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence I had once cherished after a long day, the kind filled with soft music and familiar thoughts, but something heavier, thicker, like the air itself had changed, pressing in around me, leaving no room to breathe. The streetlights blurred as I drove past them, one after another, glowing in long golden streaks across the windshield. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. There was nothing to say, because now I knew. Not suspected, not feared, knew. Every word I had read on that tablet replayed in my mind with brutal clarity. She's alone. She won't fight it. Once she's out of the house, everything becomes easier. Think about it practically. This is your future. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Alone. Won't fight. The confidence in those words unsettled me more than the cruelty. They weren't just planning, they were certain. Certain that I would be passive, that I would trust them, that I would go along quietly like I always had. And perhaps that was the most painful realization of all. Not what they were doing, but why they believed they could. Because of the way I had loved them. Because of the way I had always said yes. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house stood in front of me exactly as it always had. Quiet, still unchanged. But I was not the same woman who had left it earlier that day. I stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind me with a soft click. For a moment I leaned back against it, my eyes closed. I expected tears, a breakdown, something, but nothing came. No sobbing, no shaking, just stillness, a deep, unsettling calm. And in that calm, something began to take shape. Not fear, not grief, something sharper, clarity. I walked into the kitchen and set my keys down on the counter, my movements deliberate, measured. If they thought I wouldn't fight, they were wrong. But I couldn't react emotionally. Not yet. Because emotion would make me careless. And carelessness would give them the advantage. No. If I was going to protect myself, if I was going to survive this, I had to think. Strategically. That night, I sat at my dining table with a notebook in front of me. A simple, ordinary notebook. The kind I used to keep meeting notes in years ago. Now it would serve a different purpose. I opened it slowly. And at the top of the first page, I wrote one word, Andrew. Below it, I began to list everything I could remember. Dates, conversations, moments that had once seemed insignificant but now carried weight. The first time he asked about my will, Lauren's comments about downsizing, the doctor's appointment he insisted on scheduling, the subtle remarks about my memory. I wrote everything down, carefully, precisely. Because details matter. Details are what separates suspicion from proof. As I wrote, something inside me shifted further. Each memory, once softened by love, now stood in sharp focus. Clear, unfiltered, and undeniable. At some point, I realized my hands had stopped trembling. My breathing had steadied. The emotional storm that had threatened to overwhelm me earlier had settled. Not because the pain was gone, but because something else had taken its place. Control. For the first time since I saw that message, I felt it. Not fully, not completely, but enough to know it was possible. I closed the notebook and sat back in my chair, staring at the pages I had just filled. They thought I was weak, that I would accept whatever they decided, that I would quietly fade into the background of my own life. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, though sleep had been shallow and restless, but because my mind was already moving, planning. I went through my routine as I always did. Coffee, breakfast, a short walk outside. If anyone had been watching, they wouldn't have noticed anything different, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Because the most dangerous thing I could do right now was reveal that I knew. Later that day, Andrew called. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice casual. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, matching his tone perfectly. "How are you feeling today?" There it was. Not "how are you," but "how are you feeling?" A subtle shift. A loaded question. "I feel fine," I said. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," he replied quickly. "Just checking in. Just checking. Again." I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "I appreciate that," I said. We spoke for a few minutes. Nothing unusual, nothing revealing, but I listened more closely now to what he said and what he didn't. After we hung up, I made another note in my notebook. Phone call asked about health again. Tone cautious. Everything mattered now. Every word, every pause, every glance, because somewhere inside those small details was the full picture of what they were trying to do, and I intended to see it, all of it. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom studying my reflection. I looked the same face, same lines, same gray in my hair, but my eyes, they were different. Stronger, sharper, more aware. "I won't be easy," I whispered softly. Not to them, to myself. Because I needed to hear it, needed to believe it. They thought I was already fading, that my story was nearing its end. But they were wrong. If anything, it was just beginning, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one caught off guard. 3 days later, Andrew called again. "Mom, I made you an appointment," he said, his voice carrying that careful balance between concern and control I had begun to recognize. "An appointment," I repeated, keeping my tone light. "With a specialist," he added quickly, "just to check on a few things. Nothing serious. I just thought it would be good to get ahead of anything. You know, proactively." Proactively. Another word that sounded reasonable on the surface, but now every word felt like it had a second meaning. "I wasn't aware I needed a specialist," I said gently. "It's just routine," he insisted. "Lauren recommended this doctor. He's very good." Of course she did. I paused just long enough to seem thoughtful, not suspicious. "Well, I said if it gives you peace of mind." "It will," he replied immediately. "I'll pick you up tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. No room for delay, no room to reconsider. "All right," I said softly. After we hung up, I sat very still for a long moment, my phone resting in my lap. This was it. One of the steps. I didn't know exactly how far they intended to go, but I knew this wasn't just a casual checkup. This was part of something, and I needed to see it clearly. The next morning, Andrew arrived right on time. He walked in with that same easy familiarity, but I noticed something new now, the way his eyes lingered on me for a second longer than necessary, observing, assessing. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, picking up my purse. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. Andrew kept both hands on the steering wheel, his posture slightly tense. He glanced at me once or twice, as if he were trying to read something in my expression. I gave him nothing, just a calm, neutral presence. The clinic was modern, clean, quiet in that controlled clinical way that makes everything feel slightly removed from reality. As we walked in, Lauren was already there. Of course she was. "Scarlett," she said, standing up with a bright, practiced smile, "I'm so glad you came. I didn't realize this was a group event." I replied, my tone polite but measured. She laughed lightly. "We just wanted to be here for you. For me." The words sounded hollow. We sat together in the waiting area. Lauren scrolled through her phone. Andrew tapped his fingers lightly against his knee. I watched them both, Two people who believed they were in control of the situation. Two people who believed I didn't understand what was happening. After a few minutes, a nurse called my name. Scarlett Hayes. I stood. Andrew immediately rose with me. "We'll come with you." I turned, slightly meeting his eyes. "That's all right," I said calmly. "I can manage." There was a flicker of hesitation. Just a brief one, but I saw it. Lauren stepped in quickly. "It might be helpful for us to hear what the doctor says," she said smoothly. "Helpful. For them, not for me." I smiled gently. "I'm sure the doctor will explain everything clearly," I said. "I'll let you know if I need anything." Another pause. This time longer. Then Andrew nodded. "Okay, of course." I followed the nurse down the hallway. My steps steady, my mind alert. Inside the examination room, I sat on the edge of the chair, my hands resting lightly in my lap. A few minutes later, the doctor entered. He was younger than I expected, early 30s perhaps. Clean-cut, professional, but with a softness in his expression that immediately set him apart from the cold, calculated environment outside. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," he said, offering a small smile. "I'm Dr. Ethan Collins." "Good morning," I replied. He sat down across from me, flipping open a file. "I understand your family has some concerns about your memory and overall cognitive function," he began. There it was, clear, direct, not disguised behind vague language or polite suggestion. I felt something settle inside me. Not fear, recognition. "I see," I said evenly. He glanced up at me briefly as if gauging my reaction. "I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's all right," he continued. "Of course." What followed was a series of standard cognitive questions. Dates, names, simple recall exercises. Nothing difficult, nothing I couldn't answer easily. And I did, calmly, confidently, without hesitation. As the minutes passed, I noticed something subtle. Dr. Collins' demeanor shifted, just slightly. His initial tone, professional, somewhat guarded, softened. His questions became less rigid, more conversational. "Do you manage your own finances?" he asked at one point. "Yes," I replied. "I have for years, and your daily routine, entirely independent." He nodded slowly, making a note. Then he paused. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, "have you personally experienced any concerns about your memory or cognition?" I held his gaze. "No," I said. A quiet moment passed between us. Not uncomfortable, but significant, because in that moment I could tell he was thinking, comparing, weighing what he had been told against what he was seeing. "I appreciate your honesty," he said finally. I inclined my head slightly. "And I appreciate your thoroughness." He closed the file gently. "From what I can see so far," he said, choosing his words carefully, "there are no immediate indicators of cognitive impairment. No immediate indicators." Carefully phrased, professional, but clear enough. I felt a small, steady breath leave my chest. Not relief, confirmation. "They seemed quite concerned," he added almost as an afterthought. "Of course they did." I allowed a faint smile. "I'm sure they mean well." The words came easily, too easily. But they served their purpose. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll complete a formal report," he said. "But based on today's evaluation, you appear to be functioning very well." "Thank you, doctor." As I stood to leave, he hesitated. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "if you ever feel uncomfortable with anything related to your care or decisions being made on your behalf, it's important you speak up." I met his eyes, and for a brief moment something passed between us. Understanding. He didn't know everything, but he knew enough. "I will," I said. When I stepped back into the waiting area, Andrew and Lauren both looked up immediately. "Well?" Andrew asked. I smiled gently. "The doctor says I'm doing just fine." Lauren's expression tightened just slightly. Andrew let out a breath, though I couldn't tell if it was relief or something else. "That's great," he said quickly. "Yes," I replied, holding his gaze just a moment longer than usual. "It is." But as we walked out of the clinic together, one thought settled firmly in my mind. Whatever they had hoped this visit would prove, it hadn't worked. And that meant one thing. They would have to try something else. I didn't go straight home after the appointment. Instead, I asked Andrew to drop me off at a small cafe a few blocks away from the clinic. I could stay. He offered, his tone careful. "That's all right," I said gently. "I'd like to sit for a bit." He hesitated, just a fraction too long. Then he nodded. "Okay, call me if you need anything." "I will." I watched his car disappear down the street before turning toward the cafe door. The bell above it chimed softly as I stepped inside. Warm light, the smell of coffee, quiet conversations. It was the kind of place where no one paid too much attention to anyone else. Perfect. I chose a table by the window and sat down, folding my hands neatly in front of me. For a moment I allowed myself to breathe. The appointment had confirmed what I already knew. I was still fully capable, fully aware. But it had also confirmed something else. They were willing to use the system against me. Doctors, records, evaluations. And if that path didn't work, they would find another. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. There was only one person I could call, Judith Miller. We had known each other for over 30 years. She had been an estate attorney for most of her career, sharp, meticulous, and more importantly, someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. We met through a school fundraiser decades ago, and over time she became more than a colleague. She became a friend, the kind of friend who tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. I pressed her name. She answered on the second ring. Scarlett. Her voice was warm but alert. Everything okay? I didn't waste time. No, I said quietly, it's not. There was a brief pause. Where are you? I told her. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. That was Judith. No unnecessary questions, no hesitation, just action. I sat there staring out the window as people passed by, each of them absorbed in their own lives, their own concerns. It struck me then how easily something like this could happen without anyone noticing, how quietly a person's independence could be taken away, not with force, but with paperwork, with conversations, with carefully constructed narratives. 20 minutes later, Judith walked in. She spotted me immediately. She hadn't changed much over the years. Still tall, still composed, her silver hair cut neatly, her posture straight and purposeful. She sat down across from me without a word, at first her eyes scanning my face. Tell me everything, she said. And I did. From the message on Andrew's phone, to the conversation on the tablet, to the doctor's appointment that morning. I didn't rush, I didn't dramatize. I simply told the truth. When I finished, Judith leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. Then she exhaled slowly. All right, she said. First of all, you did exactly the right thing by calling me. I nodded, though my hands had begun to tighten slightly in my lap. This is serious, Scarlett, she continued. What you're describing, it's not just family tension. It's potential financial exploitation, possibly coercion. The words landed heavily, even though I already knew. Hearing them out loud made it real in a different way. They're my family, I said quietly. Judith's gaze softened, but her tone didn't, and that doesn't make it less dangerous. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then she leaned forward slightly. Listen to me carefully, she said. You are not powerless here, but you need to act carefully and deliberately. I understand, I replied. Good, she said, because the worst thing you can do right now is confront them without preparation. I almost smiled. I wasn't planning to. Good, she repeated, because if they suspect you know, they'll adjust. They'll become more cautious, harder to track. The word made something in my chest tighten again. But I already have some of their messages, I said. I saw them. That's a start, Judith replied. But it's not enough. Not enough. No, she said firmly. You need documentation, patterns, evidence that shows intent, not just suspicion. Intent. That word again. So what do? I asked. Judith reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, sliding it toward me. Write everything down, she said. Dates, conversations, behaviors, anything that feels even slightly off. I gave a small, humorless smile. I've already started. Her lips curved slightly. Of course you have. Then her expression grew serious again. Next we review your legal documents. My will, I asked. Yes, your will, your power of attorney, your healthcare directives, everything. I felt a chill run through me. They've been asking about those, I said. I'm not surprised, Judith replied. If they can position you as incompetent, they could attempt to gain control through legal channels. The clarity of it made my stomach turn. Not just waiting for me to pass away, but potentially taking control before that. We're not going to let that happen, Judith said firmly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt something shift. Not just control, support. You'll need to make some changes. She continued quietly, without alerting them. What kind of changes? We'll go through everything in detail, she said. But for now, the priority is this. Protect your autonomy. Autonomy. Such a simple word. And yet in that moment, it felt like everything. Do they know you have access to your own accounts? She asked. Yes. Good. Keep it that way. Don't hand over any control. No joint access. No signatures on anything you haven't reviewed independently. I wouldn't, I said. I know, she replied, but they may try to create situations where it feels easier to say yes. Easier. That word again. Everything about their plan seemed built around ease, convenience, speed. They think I won't fight, I said quietly. Judith's eyes sharpened. Then that's your advantage, she said. I blinked slightly. My advantage? Yes, she said. Let them believe it for now. The idea settled into my mind slowly. Let them believe. Let them continue. Let them reveal more. You're not reacting, she continued. That's good. It gives you time. Time. Something they thought I didn't have much of. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. I can do that, I said. I know you can, Judith replied. We sat there for a moment longer, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand lightly over mine. You're not alone in this, Scarlett, she said. The words hit me harder than I expected, because for the past few days, that's exactly how I had felt. Alone, outnumbered, outmaneuvered. But now, that wasn't true anymore. No, I said softly, I'm not. And for the first time since I saw that message, I believed it. The shift inside me became undeniable after that meeting with Judith. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady, like something had finally clicked into place. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. Over the next few days, I followed Judith's advice carefully. I wrote everything down, every conversation, every unusual glance, every question Andrew or Lauren asked that seemed even slightly out of place. At first, it felt tedious. Then it became revealing, because when you stop filtering reality through love, patterns become impossible to ignore. 3 nights after the doctor's appointment, Andrew and Lauren came over for dinner, at my invitation. That alone was enough to make Lauren raise an eyebrow. That's unexpected, she said with a polite smile as she stepped into the house. I thought it would be nice, I replied. We haven't spent proper time together in a while. That part at least was true. Andrew seemed pleased. Smells great, Mom, he said, walking into the kitchen like he used to. For a brief moment, something inside me softened. Old habits, old memories. But I didn't let it linger, because I couldn't afford to. Dinner was calm. Almost too calm. We talked about small things, Andrew's work, a new client, Lauren had signed a neighbor who had recently sold their home. Normal, carefully normal. But beneath it, I was listening differently now. Watching. And then it happened. Lauren set her fork down lightly and glanced at Andrew before turning to me. Scarlett, she began, her voice smooth, measured. Have you given any more thought to future arrangements? There it was. I kept my expression neutral. What kind of arrangements, I asked. Andrew shifted slightly in his seat. You know, he said just making things easier down the line, easier for whom, I asked gently. A brief pause. Lauren smiled. For everyone. Everyone. Such a convenient word. I nodded slowly as if considering it. I've been thinking, I said. Their attention sharpened immediately. A subtle shift, but unmistakable. Good. I suppose it's important to plan ahead, I continued. Lauren's smile widened slightly. Yes, exactly. I wouldn't want things to become complicated, I added. Andrew leaned forward just a little. Right, he said quickly. That's what we've been saying. I took a small sip of water, letting the moment stretch just enough. Then I set the glass down. Of course, I said calmly. Any decisions like that would need to be handled carefully. Of course, Lauren echoed. But I'd want to make sure everything is done properly, I added, with the right legal guidance. That word legal hung in the air for a fraction of a second. I saw it. The flicker in Lauren's eyes, gone almost instantly, but I had caught it. Yes, that makes sense, she said smoothly. Andrew nodded. Absolutely. We continued dinner after that, but the tone had shifted, subtly. They were more attentive now, more careful with their words, and that told me something important. They were invested. Deeply. Later that evening, after they left, I returned to my notebook. Dinner conversation initiated by Lauren topic. Future arrangements, emphasis on ease and planning. Visible reaction when legal guidance mentioned. I paused, staring at the page. Then I added one more line. Increased engagement when I appeared cooperative because that was the key. They weren't just planning, they were testing. Measuring how close I was to agreeing, how easy I would be to move, to control, to manage. The next morning, something else happened, something that removed any remaining doubt. I'd gone out for a short walk, something I did every morning. When I returned, I found Lauren in my kitchen, alone. She turned when she heard the door. "Oh, Scarlett," she said, her tone light. "I hope you don't mind I let myself in. Andrew gave me a key for emergencies. A key." My heart skipped, but my face remained calm. "I wasn't aware of that," I said. "Oh," she replied quickly. "He must have forgotten to mention it." "Forgotten?" "Of course." "What brings you here?" I asked. "I just thought I'd stop by," she said, moving toward the counter. "Make sure everything's all right." "Everything." Her eyes moved not directly, not obviously, but enough. Scanning, taking note, again. "I appreciate the concern," I said evenly. She smiled. Then casually, too casually, she opened one of my drawers. "My mom always says it's good to keep things organized as we get older," she added lightly. "It helps avoid confusion." Confusion. There it was again. A word planted carefully, repeated, reinforced. I stepped closer. "I don't recall asking for help with that," I said. My tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft either. Lauren paused, just for a moment. Then she laughed lightly, closing the drawer. "Of course not," she said. "I just like to help. Help. Everything framed as help." I nodded. "I manage quite well on my own," I said. "I'm sure you do," she replied quickly. But this time her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. A tension had entered the room, subtle but present. She stayed for another few minutes, making polite conversation. Then she left. As soon as the door closed behind her, I stood very still in the center of my kitchen. A key. They had a key. Without telling me. Access, control. The lines were becoming clearer now. This wasn't just about conversations or suggestions. It was about positioning, gaining access in small, seemingly harmless ways. Until one day, it wouldn't be small anymore. I walked to the counter and placed my hand flat against it, grounding myself. Then I exhaled slowly. No more doubt, no more hesitation. They weren't waiting for me to decline. They were preparing for it, step by step, quietly, carefully. And if I didn't act, they would be ready when the moment came. I walked to my desk and opened my notebook again. New entry. Lauren has access to house key, entered without notice, attempted to access drawers, continued narrative of confusion and help. I underlined one word, access. Because that's what this was about. Not love, not care, access. And now that I could see it clearly, I knew exactly what I had to do next. Not confront, not panic, but move. Quietly, strategically, before they made their next move. That afternoon, I called Judith again. "I think it's time," I said. There was no need to explain further. She understood. "Come by my office tomorrow morning," she replied. "We'll do everything properly." Everything properly. The phrase stayed with me long after we hung up, because that was the difference between what I was about to do and what Andrew and Lauren had been planning. They operated in shadows, half-truths, subtle manipulations. I would operate in clarity, precision, law. The next morning I dressed more carefully than usual. Not for appearance, but for myself. A navy blouse, structured, familiar. The kind of thing I used to wear when I needed to feel grounded, in control. Because this wasn't just paperwork. This was a turning point. Judith's office was exactly as I remembered. Quiet, orderly, lined with shelves of neatly arranged legal volumes. The kind of space where nothing was accidental and everything had a place. She greeted me with a firm nod. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said. We sat across from each other at a large wooden desk. Judith opened a folder. "Let's start with your current will," she said. She slid the document toward me. I had seen it before, of course, but not like this. Not with this level of awareness. "Right now," she continued, "your estate is divided primarily between Andrew with a few smaller allocations to charitable organizations." I nodded. "That was intentional," I said. "He's my son." I know, she replied gently, but circumstances change. Circumstances, a polite word for betrayal. I took a slow breath. Yes, I said, they do. Judith folded her hands. So tell me what you want to do. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Because this wasn't just about money, it was about meaning, about what my life had built and who deserved to carry that forward. For a moment I thought of Andrew as a child, his small hand in mine, his laughter, the notes he used to leave me. I love you, Mom. The memory flickered and then faded, replaced by the messages I had read. She will be dead soon anyway. She's alone. She won't fight it. I straightened slightly in my chair. I want to change everything I said. Judith didn't react with surprise. She simply nodded. All right, she said. Let's talk specifics. We spent the next hour going through every detail, line by line, decision by decision. This property, she said, referring to my home. Do you want it sold, donated, placed in trust? I looked at the page. Then I looked around her office. And suddenly I knew. I want it used, I said, for something meaningful. Judith raised an eyebrow slightly. Go on. I want to create a foundation, I said slowly. Something that helps people like me. Like you people who are vulnerable, I clarified. Elderly individuals who might not realize they're being manipulated. Who don't have someone to protect them. Judith studied me carefully. Then she nodded. That's doable, she said. We can structure a charitable foundation and allocate the majority of your estate to it. Majority. The word felt right. And Andrew, she asked. There it was. The question I had been avoiding. I didn't answer immediately, because despite everything, he was still my son. That truth didn't disappear just because he had betrayed me. It simply became complicated. I don't want to leave him nothing, I said quietly. Judith nodded. That's understandable. But I don't want him to have control, I added. Then we create a trust, she said. Limited access. Strict conditions, boundaries, protections. Yes, I said, that's what I want. We worked through the details carefully. A modest trust for Andrew, controlled distributions, no lump sum, no access to the property, no ability to manipulate the outcome. Everything structured, everything protected. And Lauren, Judith asked. I met her gaze. Nothing I said, no hesitation, no doubt. Judith made a note, understood. When we finished, she gathered the documents and prepared the final versions. Once you sign these, she said, your previous will is void. I looked down at the papers in front of me. So many years, so many assumptions, all condensed into a few pages of text. And now, all about to change. Are you certain? Judith asked. I picked up the pen. For a brief moment, my hand hovered above the paper, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what I was doing. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was correction. A quiet, necessary shift. Yes, I said. And I signed. My name flowed across the page with steady precision, scarlet haze. When I finished, Judith took the documents and reviewed them carefully. Then she nodded. It's done. Done. Such a simple word. But it carried everything. I leaned back slightly in my chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, not satisfaction, power, not over them, but over my own life, my own choices, my own future. They won't know immediately, Judith said, and that's a good thing. I nodded. Yes, I said, I want them to continue believing nothing has changed. Then don't change your behavior, she advised. Not yet. I won't, because that was part of the plan. Let them think they were still in control. Let them believe their strategy was working. Let them reveal more. I stood gathering my purse. Thank you, I said. Judith gave me a small, knowing smile. You're doing exactly what you need to do, she said. I paused at the door, then turned back slightly. They thought I wouldn't fight, I said. Judith's expression sharpened, and now she asked. I held her gaze. Now they'll learn, I said quietly. And with that, I stepped out into the afternoon light. The world looked the same, felt the same, but underneath it, everything had changed. Because now, the ending they were waiting for no longer belonged to them. After signing the new will, I did something that might seem strange. I made myself smaller, not physically, but in the way I moved, the way I spoke, the way I allowed myself to be seen. Because if there's one thing I had learned from watching Andrew and Lauren, it was this. They were more confident when they believed I was weaker, and confidence makes people careless. That week, I began to change my behavior, just enough to be noticed, but not enough to raise suspicion. I misplaced my keys once, not dramatically, not in a way that caused concern, just enough to sigh lightly and say, "Oh, I must be getting forgetful." Andrew noticed. Of course he did. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, watching me more closely than usual. I smiled faintly. Just a long day. Lauren, standing behind him, said nothing, but I saw the look, that quick, silent exchange between them, a glance that said more than words ever could. Later that evening, I repeated it. Not the keys this time, but a small detail. I asked Andrew the same question twice, deliberately, carefully, as if I hadn't realized. "Did you talk to that client you mentioned?" I asked. "I already told you about that," he said, his tone light but with an edge of curiosity. "Oh," I replied, placing a hand lightly against my chest. "Did you? I must have forgotten." I let a small laugh follow it. Self-deprecating, harmless. Lauren stepped in gently. "That happens sometimes," she said, her voice soft, almost comforting. Too comforting. "Yes," I agreed. "I suppose it does." And just like that, the narrative they had been building, I began to feed. Not enough to alarm them, but enough to encourage them, because if they believed I was slipping, they would stop hiding, they would move faster, and speed creates mistakes. Over the next few days, I continued. Small things, controlled things. I left a cupboard slightly open, forgot where I placed my glasses only to find them moments later, repeated a story just once as if it had slipped my mind. Each time I watched them, and each time their reactions told me more than any message ever could. Andrew grew more attentive, but not in the way a son should be. Not with warmth, with observation, with quiet calculation. "How are you feeling today?" he asked more often. "Did you sleep well?" Any headaches, dizziness, questions. Always questions. Lauren, on the other hand, became smoother, more involved, more present. She began stopping by more frequently, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with small, helpful gestures. "I thought I'd organize this for you," she said one afternoon, already halfway through rearranging a stack of papers on my desk. I let her. Not because I needed help, but because I needed to see, to understand how far she would go. "How thoughtful," I said. She smiled. "I just want to make things easier for you." Easier. That word again. Everything about their plan revolved around that word. Ease, convenience, control disguised as care. One afternoon, about a week after the will was changed, Andrew brought something up again. We were sitting in the living room. Lauren was there, of course. Always there. "Mom," Andrew began his tone. "Careful, we've been thinking." I looked up from my book. "Yes." "About your situation," he continued. Situation, another carefully chosen word. "I'm listening," I said. Lauren leaned forward slightly. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable," she said. Safe. I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." Andrew cleared his throat. "There are some really nice assisted living communities nearby," he said. "We could go look at a few, just to see." There it was. Not a suggestion anymore. A step, a move forward. I let a small pause linger, just enough to make it seem like I was considering it. "I don't know," I said softly. Lauren reached out, placing her hand lightly over mine. The gesture was gentle, but it felt like something else entirely. "It's just an option," she said. No pressure, of course. "Just to make things easier," Andrew added. Easier. Again. I looked between them. Two people who believed they were guiding me toward a decision. Two people who believed I was slowly losing the ability to decide for myself. And in that moment, I did something that surprised even me. I nodded. Maybe I said. The word hung in the air, and the effect was immediate. Andrew leaned forward slightly, relief flashing across his face. Lauren's grip on my hand tightened just a fraction. Encouragement, validation, success. "Yes," she said softly, "just maybe." I gave a small, uncertain smile. "We can look," I added. And just like that, the door opened. Not because they forced it, but because I allowed it. Later that evening, after they left, I sat alone in my living room, the quiet settling around me like a familiar presence. But inside, nothing was quiet. Everything was moving, shifting, building. I replayed the conversation in my mind, every word, every expression, every reaction. They were ready. Ready to move forward, ready to take the next step. And now, So was I. I stood slowly and walked to my desk, opening my notebook. Entry initiated. Assisted living discussion increased confidence after signs of decline. Positive reaction when I showed openness. Lauren initiated physical contact hand gesture. Both appear aligned and coordinated. I underlined one phrase. Next phase beginning, because that's what this was. Not a random suggestion, not casual concern. A phase, a progression, and if I followed it carefully, if I stayed just one step ahead, I could see the entire plan unfold. I closed the notebook and leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting toward the window. The evening light cast long shadows across the room, stretching and shifting in ways that felt almost symbolic. Once I had believed I was standing at the end of my story, that everything important had already been written. But now, I understood something different. This wasn't the end. It was the moment before everything changed. And this time, I wasn't the one being led. I was the one guiding the path, even if they didn't know it yet. Once I agreed to just look at assisted living, everything began to move faster, exactly as I expected. Andrew called the next morning. I found a place, he said, his voice almost too eager. Actually, a few. But there's one I think you'll really like. It's close, it's clean, and they have great reviews. Of course, he had already researched it. Of course, he had already chosen. How soon, I asked, keeping my tone soft. Today, if you're up for it, he replied quickly. Today. Always urgency, always momentum. I let a small pause stretch between us. Then I sighed lightly. All right, I said. We can take a look. The relief in his voice was immediate. Great. I'll pick you up in an hour. When the call ended, I didn't move right away. I simply sat there, my phone still in my hand, feeling the quiet weight of what was unfolding. This was it, the step they had been working toward. And I was walking into it willingly. Not because I was weak, but because I was ready. Before leaving, I did one more thing. I reached into my drawer and took out a small recording device Judith had given me the day before, just in case she had said. I turned it on, slipped it carefully into my purse, and closed the clasp. Andrew arrived right on time. Lauren was with him, of course. You ready? She asked, her smile warm, encouraging. Yes, I replied. The drive was filled with carefully controlled conversation. Lauren talked about the facility, its amenities, its staff, how comfortable it would be. Andrew chimed in, occasionally reinforcing her points. I listened, nodded when appropriate, said very little, because this wasn't about what they were saying. It was about what they revealed without realizing it. The facility itself was impressive. Bright, modern, clean, the kind of place designed to feel less like a transition and more like an upgrade. A woman at the front desk greeted us with a practiced smile. You must be Scarlett, she said. We've been expecting you. Of course they had. Lauren stepped forward. Yes, thank you so much for fitting us in, she said smoothly. We were introduced to a coordinator named Melissa who guided us through the building. She spoke warmly, confidently, as if this were a place people chose freely, not a place they were guided into. We focus on independence, she said as we walked down a sunlit hallway. But with the support residents need as things change, everything framed as gentle, natural. I nodded, listening, observing. At one point, Melissa turned to me. How are you feeling about all of this? She asked kindly. I hesitated, just enough to seem uncertain. I'm still thinking, I said. Lauren placed a hand lightly on my back. It's a big decision, she said. We just want what's best for her. What's best? Melissa smiled reassuringly. Of course, she said, there's no pressure. We're just here to provide options. Options, that word again. So many choices, presented in a way that led to only one outcome. We toured a room, small, neat, functional. Nothing like my home, nothing like the life I had built. But it was presented as comfort, safety, ease. I walked slowly through it, running my fingers lightly along the edge of a dresser. And for a moment, I allowed myself to feel it. The reality of what they were trying to take, not just my house, not just my finances, but my independence, my identity, everything that made me, me. Isn't it lovely, Lauren said behind me. I turned slightly. It's nice, I replied. Nice. A neutral word, a safe word. Andrew stepped closer. We don't have to decide anything today, he said quickly. Just think about it. But his eyes were searching, waiting, measuring. They wanted more than consideration. They wanted commitment. We continued the tour, More rooms, common areas, smiling staff, happy residents, a carefully constructed image, but beneath it, I saw something else. Structure, control, routine, a place where decisions were made for you, and once you were inside, getting out wouldn't be easy. By the time we returned to the lobby, I had everything I needed, not answers, proof. As we stood near the exit, Melissa handed Andrew a folder. Take your time reviewing everything she said, and let us know when you're ready for the next steps. Next steps. There it was again, progression, movement, expectation. Andrew nodded. We will, we. Not me, we, as if the decision already belonged to them. On the drive home, the tone shifted slightly, lighter, more confident. Lauren smiled more. Andrew relaxed, because in their minds, this was working. She liked it, Lauren said softly, just loud enough for Andrew to hear. I pretended not to notice. Andrew nodded. Yeah, I think so too. Think so. Not certain, but close. Close enough. When we arrived at my house, Andrew turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. So, what do you think he asked? There it was. The question they had been waiting for. I looked out the window for a moment, let the silence stretch. Then I turned back to him. I began slowly, it's something I need to consider. Not yes, not no, just enough. Lauren smiled. That's all we're asking, she said. Of course it was, for now. I opened the car door and stepped out, the cool air brushing against my skin. They waited, watching, but I didn't say anything else. I simply smiled gently and walked inside. The moment the door closed behind me, the silence returned. But this time, it felt different, heavier, sharper, because now there was no doubt left. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a process, one they had already begun, one they expected to complete. I walked to the table, opened my purse, and turned off the recording device. Then I sat down and pressed my hands flat against the surface, grounding myself, steadying my breath. They thought I was moving toward their plan, that I was slowly accepting it, that I was becoming easier to manage. But what they didn't realize was that every step they took forward was giving me exactly what I needed: evidence, clarity, control. I reached for my notebook and began writing. Entry assisted living visit completed coordinated effort between Andrew, Lauren, and facility language. Use next steps we when you're ready. Increased confidence from both after visit. Assumption of decision already in progress. I paused, then added one final line. They believe I'm close to agreeing. I underlined it, because that belief was my greatest advantage. I closed the notebook slowly and leaned back in my chair. The room was quiet, still, but inside me, everything was moving, building, aligning, because now I had what I needed, and very soon they were going to find out. I didn't rush the next step. That was the difference between their plan and mine. They were moving quickly, eager to reach an outcome. I moved carefully, because timing, I had learned, was everything. 2 days after the visit, I called Andrew. I've been thinking, I said. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then, yeah, I'd like to have dinner. I continued. All of us. Here, another pause. Longer this time. Sure, he said finally. Of course. Tonight, I asked. Tonight works. I could almost hear the curiosity in his voice, the anticipation. Good. I hung up and set the phone down gently. Then I looked around my kitchen. For a moment, memories flickered again, holidays, birthdays, quiet evenings that once felt safe. But I didn't linger there, because tonight wasn't about the past. It was about truth. I prepared the meal myself, not because I had to, but because I wanted everything to feel familiar, comforting, predictable. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the same meal I'd made countless times before. The same meal Andrew had grown up eating. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments happen in the most ordinary settings. They arrived just after 6. Lauren polished, as always. Andrew slightly more reserved. Smells amazing, he said as he stepped inside. Thank you, I replied. We sat down at the table. For a while, everything was normal. Conversation flowed easily. Lauren talked about work. Andrew mentioned a potential deal. I listened, nodded, played my part, because that's what this was now, a performance, but not for them, for the moment. Because when it came, it needed to be precise. After dinner, I stood and began clearing the table. "Let me help," Lauren said, rising quickly. "That's all right," I said gently. "Just sit." She hesitated, then sat back down. Andrew watched me quietly, waiting, sensing something. Good. I returned to the table a moment later, wiping my hands on a cloth. Then I sat, and for the first time that evening, I let the silence linger. Not uncomfortable, but intentional. Andrew shifted slightly. "Mom," he said, "is everything okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a brief moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who left notes on my nightstand, the one who held my hand when he was afraid. But that image didn't hold, because now I also saw the man who had written, "She will be dead soon anyway." "Yes," I said softly. "Everything is very clear." Lauren's posture changed, subtle, but immediate. "What do you mean?" she asked. I folded my hands neatly on the table. Then I spoke. I know I said 2 simple words, but they landed exactly as I intended. Andrew frowned slightly. Know what I held his gaze? Everything, silence, heavy, unavoidable. Lauren let out a small, controlled laugh. "I'm not sure I understand. I read your messages," I said calmly. That was it, the shift, instant. Andrew's face went pale. Lauren's smile disappeared completely. "What messages?" Andrew asked, but his voice lacked conviction. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I simply continued. "The ones about waiting," I said, "about my health, about how long it might take." Andrew swallowed. Lauren's eyes sharpened. "You shouldn't be going through private. I also know about the plan," I added, cutting gently through her words. Another pause. This one deeper, more dangerous. "What plan?" Lauren said, her tone cooler now. "The one where you move me into assisted living," I replied. "Take control of my finances. Make things easier." The word hung in the air. Easier. Lauren's jaw tightened. Andrew looked down at the table. "Mom," he started. I raised my hand slightly. Not harsh, just enough. "No," I said. "You'll let me finish." And he did, because for the first time, he wasn't in control of the conversation. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small recording device, and placed it gently on the table. Neither of them moved. "I have records," I said. "Conversations, patterns, documentation." Lauren's eyes flicked to the device, then back to me. "You're recording us," she said, her voice edged with disbelief. "I'm protecting myself," I replied. Andrew looked up then. His expression wasn't anger. It wasn't even denial. It was something else. Fear. "Mom, it's not what you think he said." I held his gaze. "Then tell me what it is," I said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Because there was no version of this." That sounded better out loud. Lauren leaned forward. "This is a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "We were just trying to plan ahead for my death," I asked quietly. Silence. Again. But this time, there was no pretending. Andrew's shoulders slumped slightly. "I didn't mean it like that," he said. "But you said it," I replied. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake, because I didn't need it to. The truth was enough. Lauren's composure began to crack. "You're overreacting," she said. "We were trying to help." "No," I said firmly. That word stopped her. "You were trying to control," I continued. "There's a difference." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "I was just thinking about the future," he said, weakly. "My future?" I asked. He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. I let the silence settle one last time. Then I reached into my bag again. And this time, I placed a folder on the table. Judith had prepared it carefully, neatly, precisely. "What's that?" Lauren asked. "My will," I said. Andrew's head snapped up. "What I updated it," I continued calmly. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lauren leaned forward slightly, and she asked. I met her eyes. "And everything has changed. No drama, no theatrics, just truth." Andrew stared at me. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," I said, "that the future you've been planning no longer exists." Lauren's expression hardened. "You can't just—" "I already did," I said. That stopped her, because this wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Andrew's voice dropped. "Mom." There was something in it now. Not manipulation, not calculation, something raw, but it came too late. "I'm not confused," I said quietly. "I'm not weak, and I'm not going anywhere I didn't choose to go." Each word landed clearly, deliberately final. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had been hidden, everything that had been denied, everything that could no longer be undone. I looked at my son one last time, not with anger, not with hatred, but with something deeper, disappointment. "You thought I wouldn't fight," I said softly. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Because now, he understood, and so did she. The plan they had built, the future they had imagined, had just collapsed, right in front of them. The silence after my words felt heavier than anything that had come before. It wasn't the kind of silence you wait to fill. It was the kind that exposes everything. Andrew sat there, his hands clasped together on the table, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere just beyond me. Lauren, on the other hand, recovered faster, she always did. Her posture straightened, her expression sharpened. "You're making a mistake," she said. Her voice was calm again, controlled, calculated. I almost admired it. "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she continued. "You're reacting emotionally. You saw a few messages out of context, and now you're out of context," I repeated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because the words themselves carried enough weight. Andrew shifted beside her. "Lauren," he murmured, but she didn't stop. "We were trying to plan responsibly," she insisted. "Your health, my health is fine," I said. That stopped her for a fraction of a second. Then she pressed forward. "That's not what the doctor suggested." I held her gaze. "Which doctor?" I asked. She blinked. "The one Andrew took you to?" she said. I tilted my head slightly. "You mean Dr. Collins?" I asked. "Yes." "He said I'm functioning very well," I replied calmly. Lauren's expression faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Andrew looked up sharply. "He said that," he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, "he did." The shift in the room was immediate, subtle but undeniable, because now, their version of events was starting to crack. Lauren recovered quickly. "He must have been trying to reassure you," she said. "Doctors don't always." "He spoke clearly," I interrupted gently. There was no confusion. Andrew leaned back slightly, his expression tightening. "You told me he had concerns," he said, looking at Lauren. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on me. "He said we should monitor things," she replied smoothly. "That's not what I heard," I said. Another crack, small but spreading. I let the silence stretch again. Let the tension build. Because now this wasn't just about what they had done to me. It was about what they had done to each other. The half-truths, the manipulations, the way Lauren had guided the narrative not just for me, but for Andrew as well. "I think we should stay focused," Lauren said, her tone tightening slightly. "This isn't about the doctor. It's about your overreaction." Overreaction, that word again. I almost smiled. "Is it?" I asked. Then I leaned forward slightly, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a pattern. Andrew's eyes flicked between us. "What pattern?" he asked. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I simply laid it out. "The questions about my will," I said. "The conversations about downsizing. The sudden concern about my memory. The doctor's appointment. The assisted living visit. Each point clear, measured, undeniable." Andrew's face shifted with each one. Recognition, discomfort, realization. This wasn't random, I continued. It was coordinated. Lauren's jaw tightened. "You're twisting things," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm seeing them clearly." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, again his breathing uneven. "Lauren," he said, his voice lower now. "Why didn't you tell me the doctor said she was fine?" Lauren turned to him, her composure cracking for the first time. "I was trying to help you," she said. "You were worried about your future, Andrew, about stability." "My future," he repeated. "Yes," she said. "Everything you've worked for, everything you deserve." "Deserve," I echoed softly. She turned back to me. "Yes," she said firmly. "He's your son. Of course he deserves." "He deserves honesty," I said. That stopped her, cold, because that was the one thing none of this had been built on. Andrew looked between us, his expression unraveling. I didn't think it would go this far," he said. His voice was quieter now, less certain. "I thought we were just planning." "For my death?" I asked again. He flinched. "No," he said quickly. "Not like that. But that's what you wrote," I said. "And this time—" He didn't deny it. He just looked down. Silence. Long, heavy. Then finally, "I didn't mean it," he said. The words came out strained. "Fragile." "I was frustrated," he added. "Things have been hard. Work, money, everything, excuses. But not the kind Lauren used. These were softer, less calculated, more human. I felt stuck. He continued, like I was falling behind. And Lauren kept saying, he stopped. Lauren's head snapped toward him. Don't, she said sharply, but it was too late. She said we needed to think ahead, he finished. There it was. The shift, the fracture. Not just between me and them, but between them. Lauren's composure broke. This isn't fair, she said. You're turning this into something it's not. No, Andrew said quietly. His voice surprised me. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. This is exactly what it is. Lauren stared at him. Disbelief, anger, calculation. You're letting her manipulate you, she said. That word, manipulate. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because this wasn't the moment for that. Andrew shook his head slowly. No, he said, I think I've been letting you do that. The silence that followed was different, not heavy, sharp, cutting. Lauren stood abruptly. This is ridiculous, she said. I'm not going to sit here and be blamed for trying to protect our future. Our future, Andrew repeated. Yes, she said, everything we've been working toward. Andrew looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw something shift. Not confusion, clarity, but it was never about us, he said quietly. It was about what we could get. Lauren didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. I watched them both, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with something else, understanding, because this was the moment everything changed. Not because I forced it, but because the truth had nowhere left to hide. I reached for the folder on the table, and now I said calmly, there are consequences. Both of them looked at me, Lauren tense, Andrew uncertain. My lawyer has everything, I continued. Documentation, evidence, records. Lauren's eyes narrowed. You're threatening us? No, I said. I'm protecting myself. A beat. Then if either of you attempt to interfere with my finances, my medical decisions, or my living situation, I let the words settle. There will be legal action. Clear, direct, final. Andrew closed his eyes briefly. Lauren said nothing, because for the first time, they understood. This wasn't a conversation they could steer. This wasn't a situation they could manage. This was a line, and they had crossed it. I stood slowly. The conversation was over. I think it's time for you to leave, I said. Neither of them argued, because there was nothing left to argue. As they walked toward the door, Andrew paused. Mom, he said. I didn't turn, because some words come too late. The door closed behind them, and just like that, the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The morning after the dinner, the house felt different. Not quieter, not emptier, just clearer, as if something heavy had finally been removed from the air. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. No replaying conversations, no fragments of messages echoing in my mind, just stillness. Real stillness. I woke up slowly, the sunlight spilling softly through the curtains, warming the edges of the room. For a moment I lay there, simply breathing, letting the calm settle fully into my body. Then I sat up, and I knew. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. The phone rang around mid-morning. I didn't need to check the screen to know it was Andrew. There's something about a mother's intuition. It doesn't disappear even after everything. I let it ring twice. 3 times, then I answered. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. Then Mom. His voice was different. Lower, quieter. I was hoping you'd call, I said. I didn't know if I should, he admitted. That's usually a sign that you should, I replied gently. Another pause. I'm sorry, he said. The words came quickly, too quickly, as if he had rehearsed them, but there was something else beneath them this time. Something unsteady. I know that doesn't fix anything, he added. No, I said, it doesn't. Silence. Not uncomfortable, just honest. I messed up. He continued, I let things get out of control. I listened, because this wasn't about interrupting. It was about understanding. I thought I was being practical, he said, planning ahead, making sure things would be easier. Easier. The word again. I didn't realize how far it had gone, he added quietly. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I did, and that in its own way was painful. Andrew, I said softly, you didn't just plan ahead. He didn't respond. You made decisions about my life. Without me, I continued. I know he said, I see that now. Do you? I asked gently. Yes, he said, I do. There was something in his voice now, not just regret, awareness, the beginning of it at least. And Lauren, I asked. A longer pause. I don't know, he admitted. Things are not good. I wasn't surprised. Did you talk to her, I asked. Yes, he said, last night after we left. And he exhaled slowly. She thinks you overreacted, he said. Of course she did. She says you're manipulating the situation, he added. I almost smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. That sounds like her, I said. I don't think she's wrong about everything he said carefully, but I think I let her push things further than they should have gone. There it was. Not full accountability, but a step, a small one. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said. I know, he replied, but I need to figure things out. Yes, I said, you do. Another pause. Then are you okay, he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight, because this time, it wasn't about monitoring, it wasn't about control, it was genuine. I am, I said, and for the first time, it was true. I'm glad, he said quietly. We sat in silence for a moment longer. Then he spoke again. Can I come by later, he asked. I considered the question, not emotionally, but carefully. Yes, I said finally. You can, thank you, he said. When the call ended, I set the phone down and sat there for a moment, letting the conversation settle. Nothing had been fixed, nothing had been resolved, but something had shifted, and that mattered. Later that afternoon, Andrew came over, alone. That in itself said everything. He stood at the door for a moment before knocking. Not like before walking in without hesitation. This time, he waited. I opened the door. He looked different. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. Less certain, less sure. Hi, he said. Hi, I replied. He stepped inside slowly. We moved into the living room and sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I've been thinking a lot, he said. I imagine you have, I replied. He nodded. I didn't see it clearly before he admitted, not the way I should have. Why not, I asked. The question wasn't harsh, just honest. He looked down at his hands. I told myself it wasn't that bad, he said, that we were just being responsible. Responsible. Another word that had lost its meaning. And were you? I asked. He shook his head slowly. No, he said. Silence. Then I let fear guide me, he added. Fear of what? Of failing? He said. Of not having enough. Of falling behind. I studied him. Because this part mattered. Not to excuse what he had done, but to understand it. And you thought the solution was me, I asked. His face tightened. No, he said quickly. Not like that. But that's what it became, I said. He nodded. Yes, he admitted. Another pause. Then I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Forgiveness isn't the question right now, I said. He looked up. Then what is trust, I said. The words settled between us. Heavy. Honest. I don't trust you, I continued. Not right now. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just nodded. I understand, he said. And that doesn't change overnight, I added. I know. We sat in silence again, but this time, it felt different. Less tense. More real. I've made some changes, I said. He looked at me. What kind of changes? Legal ones, I replied. He nodded slowly. I figured, he said. You no longer have access to anything, I continued. Not my accounts, not my decisions. I understand, he said again. And if that boundary is crossed, I added, there will be consequences. I won't cross it, he said. His voice was steady, not defensive, not pleading, just clear. I studied him for a moment, then I nodded. Good, I said, because boundaries only matter if they're respected. We talked a little longer after that, not about the past, not about the plan, just small things, careful things, because rebuilding doesn't start with big gestures. It starts with small, consistent ones. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. Mom, he said, yes, I'm going to fix this, he said. I held his gaze. I hope you do, I replied. Not a promise, not a guarantee, just truth. He nodded. Then he left. The door closed softly behind him, and once again, the house was quiet. But this time, it didn't feel like something had been taken. It felt like something had been reclaimed. In the weeks that followed, life did not return to what it had been before, and I didn't want it to, Because the truth is, once something breaks at that level, once trust is fractured in such a quiet, calculated way, you don't go back. You move forward, differently, more aware, more intentional, more honest. Andrew came by regularly after that conversation. Always alone, always respectful. He knocked every time, waited, listened more than he spoke. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, but it was consistent, and consistency matters. We didn't talk about Lauren much, not at first, but eventually the truth surfaced as it always does. She moved out, he told me one afternoon, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the kitchen. I paused, setting down the dish I was drying. I see, I said. It just wasn't working, he added. I nodded. Because some things don't need to be explained. They think they can fix it, he said quietly. Counseling. Time. And do you? I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. I don't think it was ever really about us, he admitted. No, it wasn't. And I think deep down he knew that now. We didn't celebrate that realization. There was nothing to celebrate, only understanding and consequences. A few days later, I met Judith again, not out of urgency this time, but out of purpose. We sat in her office, the same quiet space where everything had shifted just weeks before. So she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk, "What would you like to do next?" I smiled slightly, because this time, the question didn't feel heavy. It felt open. "I want to move forward," I said. She nodded. "I thought you might." We reviewed everything again, my estate, the foundation, the legal protections we had put in place. But this time the conversation wasn't about defense. It was about creation. "I've been thinking about the foundation," I said. Judith leaned forward slightly. "Tell me." "I don't want it to be passive," I explained. "I don't want it to just exist on paper." She nodded. "So what do you want it to do?" "I want it to protect people," I said. "Not just financially, but legally, emotionally, practically." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Go on." "I want to help people recognize what's happening before it's too late," I continued, "to give them access to resources, legal guidance, support systems." Judith's expression shifted. Not surprise, approval. "That's very doable," she said, "and very necessary." "Yes," I said, because I had learned something through all of this, something I hadn't understood before. These situations don't happen suddenly. They build, slowly, quietly, through small decisions that don't seem dangerous, until they are. "I want to call it something meaningful," I added. "Have you thought of a name?" she asked. I paused, then nodded. "The Hayes Foundation," I said. Judith smiled. "That feels right," she said. "Yes," I replied, because this was the legacy I wanted. Not money passed down without thought, not assets handed over without accountability, but something that mattered, something that protected, something that lasted. Over the next few weeks, we worked through the details, structure, purpose, implementation. It wasn't simple, but it was clear. And clarity makes everything easier. Meanwhile, my relationship with Andrew continued to evolve, carefully, slowly. He didn't ask for anything, not money, not access, not forgiveness, and that more than anything told me he was beginning to understand. One afternoon, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands resting quietly in front of him. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me. "Which part?" I asked. "About trust," he replied. I nodded. "That it takes time," he added. "Yes," I said. He looked at me. "Is it possible?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything. I didn't answer immediately. "Because honesty matters more than comfort." "Yes," I said finally, "but it's not automatic." "I know," he said. "And it's not based on words," I continued. He nodded. "It's based on actions," he said. "Yes." We sat there for a moment, then he leaned back slightly. "I'm going to earn it," he said. Not a promise, a decision. I studied him, then nodded. "We'll see," I said, "because trust isn't given. It's rebuilt, piece by piece, day by day, without shortcuts, without assumptions. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that might be possible. Not guaranteed, but possible." That evening after he left, I stood by the window in my living room watching the light fade slowly across the yard. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had. I wasn't the same woman who had stood in this space weeks ago, holding a cloth in her hand, staring at a message that shattered everything she thought she knew. I was stronger now, clearer, more grounded, because I had faced something difficult, and I hadn't turned away. I had acted, protected myself, reclaimed my life, and in doing so, I had found something I didn't realize I had lost: my voice, my boundaries, my power. I turned away from the window and walked slowly through the house. My footsteps steady, my thoughts calm. This wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was the one I needed. Because sometimes, the people you trust will disappoint you. Sometimes, they will break something you thought was unbreakable. But that doesn't mean you lose everything. It means you learn, you adapt, you protect what matters, and you move forward, stronger than before. I paused in the center of the room, taking in the quiet, the space, the life I had built. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was mine. There's a quiet truth many of us don't want to face, especially as we grow older. Love alone is not protection. We believe that if we give enough sacrifice, enough care, it will come back to us in the same form. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the very people we trust the most begin to see us differently, not as individuals, but as responsibilities, or worse, opportunities. And that realization can break your heart. But here's what matters. You are not powerless, not at any age, not in any stage of life. Your voice still matters. Your choices still matter. Your boundaries matter more than ever. Protecting yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. And strength doesn't always look loud or aggressive. Sometimes it looks like quiet clarity, like saying no when it would be easier to say yes, like choosing dignity over comfort, like rewriting your story, even when others thought it was already finished. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where trust was broken in a way you didn't expect? How did you respond? And where are you watching from today? If stories like this speak to you, stories about strength, resilience, and finding your voice again, don't forget to subscribe, and share your perspective in the comments. Because your story matters too, and you're never alone in it.